Okay, so now we'll quickly take notes here what we have discussed. So we tried to do the installation first. We did installation of Node server. Node will install automatically npm, a Node package manager on your machine, which is used for using either the existing Node packages or downloading some other Node packages over the internet. Then we used same npm to install TypeScript on the machine. Then we also installed VS Code on the machine as an editor. So you can use VS Code, you can use Sublime, you can use maybe Visual Studio.net, or you can use Eclipse. It doesn't matter what sort of editor you use for coding. So after this first step, that is installation, what we tried was, we tried to understand what exactly TypeScript is. So in theory, TypeScript is superset of JavaScript. So when it comes to JavaScript coding, typically people prefer to code it with respect to ECMAScript version 5 or ECMAScript version 6. And then instead of we writing JavaScript directly, a kind of C# and JavaScript, C# and Java kind of similarity TypeScript has in terms of, you can say, features, or in terms of coding as well, or in terms of declarations, definitions, and code writing or syntax. And then once we understand TypeScript, then you can generate the JavaScript which is default of ECMAScript 6 standard. Then the next thing we need to understand now, that is, by default TypeScript is typically for logic writing. We don't actually involve HTML elements into it, or DOM elements into it. So to understand that concept, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to VS Code, and in this TypeScript file, I'm just going to use a simple window.alert function. And what I'll do here, I'll put up maybe simple hello. So what is it that will happen now after I transpile this code into .js file? So I'm going to go to command prompt, and we'll use tsc and demo.ts. After I compile this code or transpile this code, now it has actually given me .js file. What is going to be there in that .js file? It's literally same piece of code. It's a valid JavaScript. But if I include this .javascript file into my HTML page, and if I try to execute this .js into browser, it will work. Reason behind that, then browser will have by default window object already initialized before my .js file runs. And this will show me a dialog that is alert with hello inside it. But what will happen if I try to execute this JavaScript using Node on the console? So if I put Node and if I put demo.js now, you'll find out we end up in exception over here. And the exception itself is self-explanatory, that is, window is not defined. Because window object does not exist in, so-called, you can say, the engine which is outside the browser. Because window object is something that is initialized by the browser inside the DOM, and so that it can be used by JavaScript. Window is not JavaScript's own object. Window is given by DOM, ultimately browser, to the JavaScript so that it can start manipulating the UI elements. So you will find out you won't have access to typical DOM objects or DOM elements in general in case of TypeScript transpile JavaScript. So now that we understand this fact, let me go back to code and let me help you understand few more facts. So in case of JavaScript, we discussed some time back, we added some var variables or var type declarations we assigned some content and we tried to transpile it, and we saw there was no change in JavaScript generation. However, JavaScript, the one problem that we have is, when you use var types, you can assign anything to it and then it can cause chaos. So instead of that, in case of TypeScript, what we have is, we have a type strictness. So JavaScript is that way loosely coupled, but when it comes to TypeScript, TypeScript is strictly typed. What does that mean? In order to declare the so-called variables, suggestion, in case just like in ES5 and 6, we can use here a keyword like let, and we can assign something like let number 1 equal to, let's say, 100. By default, let number 1 equal to 100. By default, by inference, it should actually be of type number. But then instead of it holding only numbers, or I really want it to hold numbers and I want the transpiler to check for any mistakes. So in such cases, for example, if I just say num1 equal to double quote ABC. If I do so, and then if I just try to print it on the console.log, and I will assign here num1, or I'll just print num1. Let's see what happens. Will TypeScript transpiler transpile it or convert it? Let's use TSC again. Now you will find out by inference what it has done. It has actually conveyed you that ABC is not assignable to a type called as number. Nowhere I mention in my code that num1 should be a number all the time. But then it did take this as a number by inference, simply assignment I did. What will happen if at all I really wanted it to be number only? In such cases, we can always assign a type here. So we can say let num1 be of type number. You can assign using equal to immediately. But then if you really want it by yourself that you should be able to assign the type, you can very well assign the type. And then as and when maybe num1 equal to, let's say 200 you do, and try to transpile the code, it transpiles it. You try to run the code, it runs it and prints 200 on the console. However, if you try to do something like this, and you try to transpile it, you will end up in error again, which is going to tell you that is ABC is not assignable to a type called as number. So that way you can actually assign here number. Maybe you can assign it to be string, you can assign it to be something like boolean, you can assign it to be a number, and the well-known types. And then what if you are looking for some functionality which is similar to JavaScript? What if you're looking for something like it should hold anything? In case you're looking for num1 to hold anything, you can very well assign it to any. Now you are free to assign anything, sometimes number, sometimes string, and then you can print the last recent value assigned. So suppose if I just go here and if I try to transpile it, it will transpile now. And then if I try to run it now, you'll find out it will run and print ABC. So which means if you want TypeScript to behave more, TypeScript variable declaration to behave more like var, you can very well assign any to it as in type. Otherwise you can very well go for assigning number, or you can very well assign maybe strings and booleans and kind of you can say well-known types over here. So that way, if we just go back to notes and understand it, JavaScript is loosely coupled. And then when it comes to TypeScript, TypeScript is strictly typed. And then one more fact that we saw in the discussion, that is TS won't have the DOM maybe elements, which means, for example, we saw window alert or window in general. So you won't get those typical UI elements in case of TypeScript. You're supposed to use a kind of, you can say, logic all the time. Now, the next discussion that we need to do is how do we define something like functions, how do we return from the functions, then how do we call the functions, how do we define maybe classes in case of TypeScript.